Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Welcome back, everybody. If you are caring for somebody, or maybe you know somebody who is, there are so many different emotions that go along with that. We're going to talk about that today, how to deal with those emotions, how to set up your boundaries. Caregiving is a challenge, and it's sometimes a thankless job. You got to do it. There's no other way around it. Sometimes there's help. Sometimes you need to ask for help. More emotions get involved. She helps people with this all the time, and she's Marika Humphreys. She is our professional of the year, and so great to have you back with us. How you doing today?
I am doing pretty great, Steve. Yes, had a great weekend and I'm off to a good start on a Monday, which is nice.
I love your energy.
Well, it's funny because the reason why I wanted to talk about this today is because I woke up yesterday feeling terrible and just woke up in a bad mood, feeling really heavy with emotion. And I have a process that I help my clients do to get through that very thing. So it just brought up the topic of emotions and how important it is to realize that we don't have to be at the effect of our emotions. Um, and there is ways to, there are strategies you can use to kind of handle it. I often call it processing our emotions.
Hmm.
So yes, I came out of just a bad mood the other day, and now I'm feeling great.
So interesting. So this is a process that you have to work through your emotions that you share with people who you coach?
Yes, yes.
Hmm.
And it starts with, it's going to sound obvious, but just noticing when you're being kind of driven by some emotions. Like for me, what happened yesterday for me, I woke up. I literally woke up, and I wake up generally in a pretty even mood or a good mood, but I woke up feeling just really heavy and angry, actually. And there had been something that happened the day before, and I think it was just weighing on me, and I had probably been, subconsciously thinking about it all night, and I just woke up feeling really heavy. So because I've done a lot of this work around just having awareness of my own journey in life, I was very aware of, like, oh, this just feels heavy. And the whole day, I just didn't want to do anything. I felt really like drugged down. So I
Hmm.
made it a point to spend some time doing the things that I'll talk about here in a minute, just going, listening to emotions. So one of the things, let me just step back again. Having awareness that you're in an emotion, I think so often we live we feel like we're at the effect of our emotions, like we have no choice in the matter. I'm just angry, or I'm just in a bad mood, or I'm really grumpy today. And really, we do have a lot of say over our emotional state when we can dive in and kind of figure out what is causing that emotion. So we don't have to be just at the effect of our emotion. If we're angry, maybe let's figure out why. What happened and what are you thinking about it? So I think that's the first step, is just being aware of what emotions you're experiencing. And
Hmm.
sometimes it's just like, I'm in a bad mood versus I'm in a good mood. But the more language you have around being clear on what kind of emotion you're feeling, that is also really helpful. There's a common saying, name it to tame it. And if you can name the emotion, then that gives you a little more insight into what's going on, why you're feeling that emotion. So for me, I was feeling some sadness and also anger, which often go together.
Hmm.
So being able to name what you're experiencing can be really helpful.
Based on what you just said, I've had this, I don't want to call it a debate, but a discussion about anger, and that anger is usually another emotion showing up as anger. Could be sadness, could be frustration. And then that led to, can anger just be anger? Or is it always another emotion? The jury is still out on everybody I've spoken to, including myself. because it usually comes, at least in my thinking, from somewhere else, whereby sadness is sadness by itself. Um, Happiness, I'm just happy. But anger is fueled by something else. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've never thought about it in terms of, is it always what we call often is, it's called a cover emotion. So anger is a common cover emotion. We feel angry in order not to feel fearful or sad or disappointed. Anger it feels more productive, but it covers up those what feel more uncomfortable feelings, like you talked about, sadness or often fear too.
Mm,
And interestingly enough, that was my experience yesterday. I was angry, but I realized I was angry because I had been scared. It was just a personal matter that I won't go into here, but the anger was really on top of the fear and the that I had felt. But is it always on? That's a good question. I don't know that it necessarily. It's a good question. I don't know that there's a clear answer to that. I think it's helpful to know that anger is often, again, a cover up for other emotions that we are feeling. But I think probably there are times where it can be anger,
mm.
indignance. Um, yeah, it is usually, I think, linked to another kind of thought we have about things. So
Yeah,
yeah,
something to think about. So next time you're angry, to stop and pause. And why? I mean, I call it angry, yesterday or whatever. I think about it, like, why am I like this? Like, that's why.
yeah, yeah.
Something.
I think the good question to ask yourself is there something behind this? Is there
Yeah,
something more going on? Am I angry because of I'm also really scared or I'm fearful or something else happened? I'm feeling
sure.
really vulnerable. We often like anger feels powerful. So
Frustrated or powerless. I made this choice. Now I'm in this situation. Now I'm frustrated, angry at myself, whatever it
yeah,
might be.
yeah,
Um, let's work through those emotions that come with being a caregiver. One of them, big one, guilt.
yeah, yeah. Guilt is a fun one, isn't it?
Mm,
And gu- first thing I want to say is all of our emotions come from how we think about things, not from the things that happen to us or the things that people say. So somebody could outright say you are a terrible caregiver and you feel guilty. You're feeling guilty not because of what they said, but because some part of you believes it may be true, or maybe
mm,
you think, oh, what if they're right? It's your thinking about it. If you don't believe that's true, and none of you believes that, you won't feel guilty. You won't have that emotional reaction. So it is important to know that it's not what happens in our world or what people say to us. It's how we think or interpret or judge those things. So
mm,
that is useful because then it means when you can identify how you're thinking that's causing that emotion, that then you can get to work on like at least questioning it. And guilt
sure.
is a perfect one for that because guilt is often a feeling that we have when we either believe we should be better or we should do something better or we should have done something differently, or it's an often a self-judgment feeling, and that comes from our ideas about what it means. Let's just say what one example that comes up I think a lot for caregivers is taking time for themselves, whether it's going out with a friend or taking time away from the person they're caring for to have an exercise routine or whatever it is. They often will feel guilty about it,
Mm,
and usually it's because there's some flawed thinking in there that we kind of just adapt from our culture and our expectations and whatever expectations we have of ourselves, that we should, as a caregiver, always be caring for our person, or we should always be available, or a good caregiver is, devoted 100% to the person they're caring for. And those are just kind of, any rational person would say that's ridiculous. That's not even humanly possible. But sometimes those thoughts are in the back of our mind, in our subconscious, and that's why we do feel guilty
Sure.
when we, take time away. So the when you just start to just notice, and guilt is a great one, why are you feeling guilty? And ask yourself, why am I feeling guilty? If you can answer that question, then I would urge you just to question it. Is that true? Is it
Mm,
okay to take some time away in the example?
that's you, those words you just said. Is it true? Psychologists, hypnotherapists use that many times as a statement to yourself. Let's say, I'm going to go hypothetical. You feel guilty because you took time off from your caregiving to get a massage. You just feel tense and everything. You just need an hour, whatever it is. Is it true that you should not take that time to yourself? Because when you say, is it true? Or flip it around. Is it true that you should take time for yourself so you can be a better caregiver? Well, answer the question. Of course.
Right.
Who would dispute that? So those, the words you use there are very powerful.
Yeah, because it changes how you think about it, right?
Right.
Like it comes down to your own opinion or your own judgment about that. And another example is to illustrate how your perspective is so important. Let's say you somebody gives you a lottery ticket and you win $500. Well, if you are a person who's making just barely making ends meet, that is going to be amazing, awesome, make your day. You're going to be in the best mood. You're going to have all of these emotions about winning that $500.
Sure.
Somebody else who's making let's say they make 500,000 a year as an income, $500 is like nothing. They might even give it away. So their emotional reaction to being given that winning lottery ticket is going to be like, oh, that's nice, okay, that's nice, but it doesn't have much of an impact on them. And the ticket is the same. It's just asking them, how their thoughts about that ticket is totally different because there are different situations and different things. So yeah, when you ask yourself, is it true? It forces you to rethink it, think
Mm.
about it from a different perspective.
It kind of releases the guilt if that's the intent, if you're going through the guilt, because if you're saying to yourself, yeah, is it true that is it true that I need this time to be a better caregiver? Um, how do you dispute that? You say that you have something to work through these emotions or some suggestions. Any more?
Yeah, so there's one process which is going to sound weird to people, and it was weird to me. And it is this idea that, first of all, just knowing that our emotions they don't mean anything about us as humans. Like sometimes we feel guilt or shame or all of these emotions that we've sort of been taught that this means something's wrong with us or we're a bad person. So if you can just accept that emotions are just simply an outcome of how we think about things, and they're important to listen to. I often like to say emotions are just messengers. They're just messengers to pay attention to something in your life. So if you can kind of take those as kind of as a given that emotions aren't in and of themselves, doesn't mean anything about you, then they really need an outlet. And most of us try to avoid our emotions, especially the ones that we don't like. We're very good with that. And all the distractions we have in our society, we have food, we have alcohol, we have endless social media, endless ways to distract ourselves. Or we often try to push them down. Like caregivers often will do that. They try to push down they're feeling overwhelmed or they're feeling fearful or sad. And they're like, oh, I need to be strong. So I'm just going to push those emotions down.
Mm,
But the problem with all of those trying to avoid the emotion is emotions don't go away. They just often will build up. And that's when people do have emotional breakdowns. I mean, that's maybe not the only reason, but that's when we become overcome with our emotions because we've just let them build up. So the solution to that is to give your emotions some attention. And what I like to do, and what I encourage people, and this is the part that's going to sound weird, is it can take like 5 minutes, and you close your eyes. Closing your eyes is super important. So you obviously need to be seated somewhere. And you basically I call it kind of turning your senses inward to inside your body. And you will feel something. It may feel like, sometimes it'll feel like pressure. You may feel it, something in your chest. We often feel emotions in our head, neck, and our chest area. And most people don't think about experiencing emotions physically, but that's because they've just simply never paid attention. I had never paid attention. Now it's the first thing I do. But
Hmm.
when you just pay attention to how that physical feeling is in your body, and you sort of observe it and just look, and I like to try to tell myself to breathe into it and just relax into it. That is one way you can release an emotion or process an emotion without it having any negative consequences. So, if you're feeling guilty, a lot of times we kind of act out of those emotions when we don't process them. But if you close your eyes, like, what is this feel? What does this actually guilt feel like? Maybe it's a heaviness in your chest. Like, that's often what comes up a lot for people.
Hmm.
And just noticing that's all it is. It's just this heaviness. And that's okay. It's not going to kill me. And I can just acknowledge it, right? It's okay to feel this. And for like 5 minutes, just sitting there with it, you will be surprised that often, if you are able to just observe it and like not have any judgments around it, which can sometimes feel scary, it will just sort of dissipate. That feeling will sort of go away.
Hmm.
That's one of the easiest ways, but also probably one that most people are unfamiliar with or feels a little strange.
Wow. And you're right. This, all of this here, the tension, the neck, the chest, that's where it centers. All of the,
Yeah.
those heavier emotions. What are some of the other ones that somebody as a caregiver might be dealing with? We identified guilt. What are some of the other ones?
I think overwhelm is
Hmm.
pretty common. And that comes up. I mean, it comes up, I think, a lot in life, in other areas as well, but definitely in caregiving. Sadness or grief, and they are a little bit different, but both of those, often grief can come around seeing losses in either your own life, maybe losses in your ability to have as much free time or discretionary time that you once had, maybe
Hmm.
losses in the person you're caring for, maybe their physical abilities or their cognitive abilities. And that grief is something that, just again, I talk about acknowledging it so much because it's important to just validate, right? We've talked about this before, just validating our feelings that this is hard. It's hard to see someone decline, or it's hard to cope with the changes in your own life. Those are some common emotions. What did we talk about? Yeah.
You really identified something that many of us don't realize, and that's because of your experience in being a coach. Loss, loss of your life in terms of what it was prior to caregiving, and some of us, and then, I guess the other emotion is what comes with feeling you're a victim. Like, why me? Why did this happen? Why do I have to do this? I know I love this person, but my gosh, I used to have time to, get my nails done once every 2 weeks or whatever it might be. Loss of that freedom.
Yeah.
So that's a bit, I never even thought of that.
Yeah, that I think loss happens a lot. That emotion comes up a lot, and in a lot of different ways, both on both sides, both for the losses we encounter ourselves and for what you're seeing, how you see the person you're caring for, whether it's an illness or disease. their losses or what the changes they go through. I coach people who are caring for their partner, so often they're seeing their partner decline, and that's just it's hard. And by acknowledging that, you mentioned like feeling like a victim, why me? Part of that is when we acknowledge those losses and just give ourselves some compassion that this is hard. And yes, you have lost some things, and let yourself just just feel that loss for a little bit. That
Hmm.
can help with moving forward. So many times people say, I just need to accept this. And acceptance is great, but it is a process. And often when we don't acknowledge the losses that we've faced, it's harder to get there. It's harder to get to acceptance. You have to first acknowledge your losses and whatever other emotions. Sometimes anger is another one, I think.
Hmm.
Like again, the cover, perhaps the cover emotion for loss, but people often will feel the anger more. They're like, I'm just mad that I'm in this situation. I'm only 20 and now I'm a caregiver or whatever it is. I'm kind of making up stuff, but that happens for people.
Sure, sure. And it may be not even anger, just frustration. I'm frustrated. I'm stuck. I have nowhere to turn. And I can't stop. I have to continue. It's like climbing a mountain. You're halfway up the mountain in caregiving. You got to go all the way. There's no turning around and climb it back. Am I going to do this anymore? You have to. And let's be honest, many times as a caregiver, you know the diagnosis and you know what could be at the other side of the hill. And you still have to keep going and you have to be as positive as possible. More emotion.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's helpful to I mean, again, it all comes back to one of the steps to doing that, to how do you get yourself to a positive state, is by allowing yourself to know that there's emotions you're going to feel and it's okay.
Hmm.
Like it's okay. You don't have to be this just positive person. You can, when whatever you're feeling, knowing that you're going to feel that and it's okay. And if you give yourself some space, then you can get to, and
Sure.
now what can I be grateful for, or what do I want to focus on instead? Because I know I've allowed myself to feel sad or angry or frustrated or overwhelmed, and to process through that and kind of release it. So now I can move forward. Okay, what do I want to make of this life given now my constraints as a caregiver? That's the ultimate question.
Two words come to mind with everything we've talked about today, Marika, and that is feel it. You have to feel it. You can't just put it aside. You can't throw it. I call it the emotional backpack. I mean, just throw that one back there. Keep going. Eventually, you're not even going to be able to stand up because it's going to pull you back. It's going to be so heavy. So you have to feel the emotions. You have to work through them. You can't bury them. Um,
Yeah,
and don't
I
feel
love.
guilty.
Yeah, emotional backpack. That's a great analogy because the more you the more you shove in it, it's going to weigh you down. Another technique that I teach people, but you can also, this is an easy one, and anybody can Google it, and anybody can find how to do it on YouTube or anywhere in the internet. It's called tapping, otherwise known as emotional freedom technique.
Yep.
And I personally, I was introduced to this several years ago in a coaching program myself, and I love it
Hmm.
because one of the things is it's anybody can learn to do it on themselves, and it's super easy and free, and it really works. It
Yep.
works amazingly.
There's
So I
tons of videos
recommend.
out there. Yeah. And
There are tons.
we're
Tapping
out of
with
time.
Brad. Yes,
Maybe
I
maybe next
recommend
time
his videos. Yep.
we pick up. It is, in my understanding, it has been very impactful for those with PTSD and helping them through it. And there's different meridians that you tap on your body,
Hmm.
and you say certain phrases. But yeah, EFT. It's just bottom line, I think it just refocuses your brain while you're tapping.
Yeah,
and
it
or
actually has. They're studying it more and more, and I think within a couple of years, we're seeing already the data has come out to just
yeah,
show that this is a valid technique. But it calms your nervous system. So one of the ways I would recommend somebody to look up a tapping. They're called like tapping meditations. Often, you might just look up tapping for anxiety or tapping for fear or tapping for caregivers and just see what comes up. That's a great way to
yeah.
find one. And it takes about anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes.
There's even an app for that. You just reminded me on my
There it is.
phone. And it was months ago I downloaded it and haven't used it yet. I get emails because you sign up. It's free, and if you want further instruction, you can pay whatever. But as a springboard, there's an app. How do we connect with you, Marika? If somebody's dealing with emotions, challenges in their world of caregiving, you have so much insight. How do we do that?
Yeah, go to my website, coachmarika.com, and you can click on, in fact, I have a section on my website called Hey Overwhelmed Caregivers. So click on there. You can learn a little bit about me, my history, but you can also set up a time to just talk through what you're struggling with, and we'll see if it's a good match. But yes, on my website, I also have a podcast. So you'll see episodes to that on my website as well, all for caregivers.
Thank you for what you're doing in helping people. There's not a lot of resources out there and validation for these feelings and emotions, and appreciate it. Thank you so much for being here.
You are welcome, Steve. I enjoy it.
Yep. We'll talk soon. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.